I'm Aubrey Sitterson, and this is SKALD. You're listening to the only story that matters. It's totally DIY. I write it myself, and I record it in one single, flawless take. SKALD is serialized. It's an ongoing story, but you don't have to start at the beginning. Instead, you can just dive right in with this episode. It's the best one yet. Afterward, if you feel compelled to find out how we got to this point, check out the previous podcast episodes for free, or pick up the prose volumes exclusively on Amazon. This isn't me reading you a story. This is me telling you a story. This is SKALD, part 77. She watched her hand disappear into shadow, consumed by darkness. The act soothed her. It calmed her. Or at least it should have. She curled her ancient, wrinkled, gnarled fingers and scratched, raking her fingernails against that hidden flesh, buried under piles of fur so dark that it swallowed up the light. And as she did so, she let the creature's vibrations, its contented growls, its monstrous purrs, let them travel up into her hand, through her arm, and she tried to will them in to her fevered, exhausted, defeated brain. But it was no use. She opened her eyes and sighed as the massive cat beast looked up at her expectantly. Umbra, whom Caleria had raised from a kitten, had raised to serve her loyally and to serve her only. Raised by hand after finding the creature guarded within the world tree, within her world tree, miraculously hatched from those cracking ash roots. But though Umbra, seated proudly next to Caleria's chair, though she purred loudly enough for all those present, the proctors, the officers, the advisors, and the servants, loudly enough that they could all hear, it did nothing to soothe the Lady of Ravena's troubled mind. Takya. Caleria turned to face her general, ignoring the massive cat beast at her side, the one who pressed its gargantuan head against her hand. I would hear your report. The general, his brow deeply furrowed, spoke with his rage and frustration barely contained. My report is the same as yesterday and the day before. The centaurs increased their ranging. They continue to smash against our fortifications, continue to tear down our walls, to set fire to our city, to your city, and continue to send our citizens, the ones who managed to escape, pouring into the neighboring arrondissements. And there they wait, in fear, clutching what little they could carry with them, waiting for the centaurs to attack once again. The general bit his lip, waiting just a beat too long before adding, "My lady." Caleria made to once again bury her fingers in the calming, thick, midnight black fur of her pet, of her companion, Umbra. But she stopped short, thinking better of it. No, even if the touch of that sumptuous fur could calm her, even if it was capable, it was not what she needed. Not now. No, she needed something hard, something unyielding, something ancient and coursing with power. So she reached out with her other hand and found her gnarled staff, the one topped with that smoky, flawless pearl, and she wrapped her hand around it, finding the worn spots where she liked to rest her fingers, imagining that the staff bolstered her flagging energy and confidence. The borders. How much have they contracted? Takia looked at the map of Ravenna spread out before him, the parchment boasting borders that had been drawn, erased, redrawn, and erased again. And then he looked up, shocked by the answer. We've lost another 2 miles on the western border. Caleria nodded as her chamber filled with gasps and murmurs, mumblings that halted as she began to idly tap her staff upon the flagstones. Historically speaking, though, how far are they from Ravenna's true borders? Takia appeared offended by the question. How far are they? My lady, they are past our borders. They are within our borders. Ravenna, your city, has been invaded. Caleria shook her head. No, the original borders. From before the Great Expansion. From before Henno. Have the centaurs reached them? A proctor, one more steeped in the city's history than General Takia, leaned in to examine the map, and then spoke haltingly. I believe they're still several miles away, at least, on what looks like all fronts, my lady. Takia pounded his fist on the table. For now! A day, maybe 2 if we're lucky. At the rate they move, at the rate they stampede, that distance will be gobbled up before you know it, and they will be waiting on our doorsteps. Caleria glared at Takia, who now shrank into his chair, knowing that he flew dangerously close to the flames that burned in his lady's eyes. Perhaps not, General Takia. The city of Ravenna and its earlier borders, they predated even the centaurs in this border realm. She forced a smile at her general. Let us hope that they only wish to restore the balance, not tip it over completely. Takia, choosing his words carefully, spoke again. And are we to do nothing but hope? Hope that these monsters don't continue their push? Caleria shook her head. No, General Takia. You are to do as you always do. Find a way to protect this city, to protect my city. Something angry flared up inside of her. And if you are incapable, I shall find someone better suited for the position. Takya, knowing that further discussion would only harm him, assented. Yes. Yes, my lady. Caleria leaned back into her chair, laying her staff in her lap. She chuckled to herself at the sight. A gnarled stick laid across her legs, themselves a pair of twisted, ancient wood. And besides, we are confronted not only by threats from without. She turned to one of her advisors, struggled to find her name in her memory, then gave up and spoke without it. What word from Ho? Has he found the vermin prince? The advisor swallowed hard, bracing herself to deliver unfortunate news. We do not know, my lady. Caleria clenched her eyes shut, struggling to remain in control of the cathartic blaze that roiled inside of her. You don't know? What of the necklace? Did you track it? The advisor continued. We did, my lady, and we thought that we had found him. The necklace had been motionless for such a long time, but it appears as if Ho has sold it. The Lady of Ravenna sighed. Master. The advisor leaned in, confused. Excuse me? She looked around the room, hoping for some clue as to her lady's meaning. Master Ho, an appellation he has more than earned. Caleria forced herself to her feet, her bones creaking audibly. And as she did so, her generals, her proctors, her advisors, and her servants also stood, the better to receive her orders. We can only hope that wherever he is, he's remained in control. Though it wasn't cold, though it was, in fact, muggy and balmy inside his chambers, Ho shivered. He sat upon that thin mat, as clean as could be provided in those labyrinthine tunnels, and he rocked back and forth, his arms wrapped around his knees, his eyes fluttering open, clenching closed, then shooting back over again. All in an effort, in a futile effort to stop seeing that which had assaulted his vision, had assaulted his very senses, in the court of the vermin prince. He sat there, huddled in the corner of that room, carved countless ages ago and lined with veins of that same haunting crystal, the one that spilled yellow light out in such abundance that torches and lamps were unnecessary. Initially, Ho had worried that he wouldn't be able to sleep in that jaundiced light. But now, he chuckled to himself, laughing at his ignorance and his foolish belief that he would ever be able to sleep again. He had watched, horrified, disgusted, his mind spinning. He had watched as the pink smoke had wrapped itself, lovingly almost, around that poor soul, around the man who had called himself Garn. Ho had watched as the smoke, impossibly, had hardened and solidified, wrapping Garn in a slick, wet, opaque cocoon, one that writhed upon the ground as the Vermin Prince's followers chanted and murmured, repeating that damnable refrain, the phrase that held such eldritch, inexplicable power. We serve the Vermin Prince, and we are no longer content with scraps. Ho had watched as the cocoon spasmed and shook, as whatever it held attempted and failed to stand, to run, to fight, to do Ho knew not what. He watched as the cocoon shifted and changed shape, but it did nothing to dampen the horrible sucking, wet, cracking noises that came from within that vile chrysalis. And worst of all, most horribly, most unbearably, Ho had watched as the cocoon had cracked, had let loose a wave of fetid air, a pungent stench that traveled upon the pink smoke that the discarded casing disintegrated into. He had watched as what that cocoon had contained, what it had created, what it had defiled and perverted, watched as it stood upon new, terrible legs, as it stretched new, terrifying arms, and it raised its cursed head to the heavens that had abandoned it, and Ho awoke suddenly, as one who was unaware that he had fallen asleep. He awoke to the sound of a crisp, almost joyous knock at the simple wooden door, the one that the Vermin Prince had ordered locked from the outside. He knew not who stood beyond the portal, knew not whether they came to feed him or feed on him, knew neither where he was nor how long he had been there. He knew only this: whoever it was would enter, whether he liked it or not. So it was best to welcome them. Come in. He was shocked by how timid and how weak his voice had grown. And he was even more shocked when he saw who opened the door, saw whose grinning face peered in at him before sweeping into the room in a rush of fine fabrics, the noise of which almost, but not quite, covered up the sound of the door being locked behind her. It was the High Elf Ambassador, Harana. Good afternoon, Master Ho. I hope I'm not interrupting. Ho looked up at that stoic, severe figure, looked up through eyes that even in that omnipresent yellow light still glowed a bright, fey green. And he spoke softly. Of course not. Harana glanced at the mats that lined the floor. Do you mind if I sit? The walk here was... She smiled. Longer than it seemed. He nodded silently, and it was all the permission that Harana needed as she gathered up the flowing silks that surrounded her and lowered herself down to the mats. Why? Ho licked his dry lips. Why are you here? Harana turned and rearranged herself, staring into Ho's eyes uncomfortably long before finally answering. I am here for the same reason that I am anywhere, for the same reason that I do anything, for the same reason that I eat, that I drink, and that I breathe. Because my liege, Queen Enlith, wills it so. Ho felt transfixed by Harana's gaze, and he was unable to speak before she continued on. A wise man such as yourself. You know your history, don't you? She grinned. I'm sure you do. Enlith, Queen Enlith, was once cast out of this realm in a most ignoble fashion by the witch, by the usurper, by the one who styles herself the lady of this foul city, by Caleria. And though time travels differently across the sundered worlds, though we, the High Elves, are blessed and cursed with lives that are, in my opinion, far, far too long, our memories are longer still. And so, Queen Enlith, seeing an opportunity, seeing an opening, seeing a chance to strike back at the one who so disgraced her, who stole this border realm from her. She is preparing herself to act. Ho, fighting through his momentary paralysis, managed to croak a few words. I don't. But Harana stopped him with a hand upon his shoulder, a touch so gentle he thought that it might have been a dream. And she continued on. Queen Enlith has allied herself with the Vermin Prince. She has thrown her considerable powers behind him and his cause. She has sent me to help him, to educate him in magics that are far beyond the natural ken of your race, of his race. And once the Vermin Prince is triumphant, once he has sent the witch tumbling out of her tower, then he shall rule in the name of Queen Enlith. Once again, Ho fought through his daze, and this time managed to squeak out a few more words. No, I meant, why are you here? With me? Now? Harana closed her eyes, and she let her body shake in a silent laugh. Of course that's what you meant. Her eyes shot open, and she reached her hand out once again, taking Ho's chin and raising it up, the better to let the room's yellow light fall upon his face. It's your eyes. I saw something in them. Something I recognized. Ho shivered, but not from the memory of the vermin prince's throne room and what had occurred there. No, he shivered from something else, from a cool, relaxing sensation, a feeling that was at once alien and all too familiar, one that seemed to spiral out from where the elven ambassador touched him. And if you trust me, can I ask another question? Harana smiled. Of course, Master Ho. Still seated upon the mat next to her, like two children sharing secrets, he asked her, What magics are you here to teach him? He didn't wish to say the name. Suddenly, the jaundiced yellow light flickered, and in an instant of darkness, Ho saw the elf smile. But it wasn't the elf's smile. No, it was something else, a terrifying rictus grin that flashed into existence before disappearing back into whatever depths had birthed it. Why, Master Ho, you have already seen them. Ho fought back his fear. He choked down his revulsion and stuttered his response. The transformation of Garn? Harana burst into a peal of laughter, a hearty guffaw that kept her from speaking as she wiped tears from her eyes. No, nothing like that. Those are base magics, ones that the vermin prince, he learned those on his own. What I can teach, what I'm here to teach, what I have taught the vermin prince is beyond simple transmutations, changes that simply make visible what has always been there. Ho was confused. Then what is it? What are they? Harana sighed and shook her head. The circle, Master Ho. He was practicing as he waited for you. He was searching the chaos, calling out into that roiling underneath. Ho felt fear growing within him, but he knew not of what. Calling out, but to what? Harana's brows lowered as her smile took on a more sinister bent. No, Master Ho. To whom? I have come to teach the vermin prince an art most exquisite, an art forgotten and forbidden, an art practiced in secret and in constant, soul-shaking fear. The art of summoning, of evocation, And soon, so very soon, the Vermin Prince, your protege, he will reach out. He will give of himself, and in return, he will receive more than he has ever dreamed of. The Vermin Prince will call forth that which he needs to pursue his unholy vengeance. He will call out and call forth and summon up a destroyer. The word echoed unnaturally inside Ho's chambers, bouncing off that roughly hewn stone, traveling upon those beams of jaundiced yellow light. And Ho, he allowed it. He let the word and all it entailed, all it contained, let it wash over him, let it travel through his ear canals and rattle around his skull. He let it sink into his brain, let it touch his spirit, and he sat silently, ruminating upon it as Harana observed, as she sat and watched the word's effect on him. And when he was done, when that interminable moment had passed, he turned to Harana one final time and spoke. I'm sorry, Ambassador Harana. I have one final question. Harana stared back at Ho, unflinching. Yes, of course, Master Ho. Ho's green eyes flashed as a grin stretched across his face. Could you get me something to drink? Thanks for checking out this, the best episode of SKALD yet. If you've made it this far, in this episode, or in the series as a whole, I think it's safe to assume that you dig SKALD. And if you dig SKALD, you really need to write a review of the show on iTunes. The podcast space is an extremely crowded one, and the only way for a DIY show like SKALD, one that is so weird and so unique and so specific, the only way for it to stand out is through good reviews. I do a lot of different work each and every week. Comics, my wrestling podcast, web writing, and more. But of all of it, SKALD is the most important. That's because SKALD is me, unfiltered. I don't have anyone I have to please except myself, and I have complete freedom to tell my story the way that I want to tell it. It's like an ongoing television show you can enjoy on your commute, one that never takes weeks off. It's like a comic that comes out every single week by the same creative team, me. But unlike those forms of entertainment, SKALD is free and has no advertising. So if you enjoy SKALD, do the right thing and chip in a few bucks to help me keep bringing it to you each and every week without fail. Head to patreon.com/skald today, where you can even get great rewards like shoutouts and free prose volumes, while helping us reach our goal of bringing weird, live synth music to the only story that matters. If you want information on me or any of my many, many projects, your best bet is to hit up aubreysiderson.com. It's got links to everything you could possibly need. Also, make sure to follow me on social media. I'm Aubrey Siderson on Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, and Snapchat. Finally, my weekly recommendation. They were one of my favorite bands growing up, and I kind of always assumed that everyone at least knew about them too. But as I just learned recently, a lot of folks aren't familiar with how amazing John Spencer Blues Explosion is. They're a deliciously scuzzy 90s band that was way, way ahead of their time with their bluesy roots rock approach. My favorite album is probably the Dan the Automator produced Acme, but a better starting point is the werewolf-themed album called Plastic Fang. Get in there. Thanks for listening. I'll talk at you next week.